Hey everyone, this is Turd Flinging Monkey. So today I'm going to talk about fertility rates once again. Now in a previous video I talked about what I called the puppy mill solution. And it's been criticized because it's inhumane, it's not reasonable, it's not an achievable goal. Now I will admit it's not humane. The reason why I started with that position is twofold. One, when you're starting any sort of negotiation, you don't start with the reasonable middle ground. You start demanding everything, and then you eventually reach the middle ground through negotiation. And the second reason is, when you start with an extreme position, it makes your moderate positions more reasonable. So having gotten the extreme position out of the way, we can now talk about the reasonable positions. However, I will say that if the goal required a fertility rate of 6 or greater, the puppy mill solution would be the only way to achieve that goal. I will stand by that. Luckily, we don't need a fertility rate of 6 to save Western civilization. Right now, the West is struggling simply to replace its population. Its fertility rate is under 2. Now, in case you haven't figured it out yet, it takes 2 people to make a baby. So if those 2 people have less than 2 kids, the population will slowly shrink. Now, many people have said, well, why does it matter? Isn't the world overpopulated anyway? And while the global population is growing, the Western population is shrinking. Now, why is that important? Well, as far as humanity is concerned, it doesn't really matter. As long as the global population is growing, humanity is not at risk of extinction. The problem is which cultures are going to shape the future. Now, I want to see technological innovation. I want to see transhumanism. I want to see humanity reach the stars. We're not going to get there by regressing into a new dark age. My concern isn't necessarily with the loss of human life, it's the loss of human knowledge. The only way I see technological progress happening is through the first world. So therefore, I want to preserve the first world. I want those cultures to grow and expand and survive so that technological improvement can increase. I don't want to see those cultures go extinct and be replaced by third world cultures and enter a new dark age. So the question now becomes, what is it about Western civilization or first world countries which causes such a declining birth rate? Why can't first world countries reproduce to replacement levels? Some people accuse me of focusing only on 1 or 2 things, such as perhaps female education, female rights, at the expense of other very important things like Captain Crunch consumption. But as you'll see, the statistics are on my side. The problem is when you distill the problem to its basic elements, you don't get very many desirable solutions. All the solutions on the table aren't very pleasant. But I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in preserving the future for humanity. Now, in my previous video, I put forward that the reason why the fertility rate is low is because women have too many rights. And in order to get the fertility rate back up, you have to take their rights away. In order to get the fertility rate above 6, you'd have to take all of them away. Treat them essentially like animals. Now, we don't need a fertility rate of 6, so we don't necessarily need to go that far. But we do need to take some of their rights away if we want to get the fertility rate higher than below 2. Now, some of my traditionalist critics would argue that that's inhumane and incompatible with our ideals and principles. But their solution is to establish religious principles in society which would accomplish the same thing. So if you look at cultures like Muslim enclaves, the Amish, Mormons, Catholics, and so forth, they have a higher fertility rate than the national average. But that's because their culture naturally restricts women's freedom. Women in fundamentally religious communities don't enjoy the freedoms that women do in Western egalitarian communities. Their freedoms are restricted. Even if they technically have the freedom to do those things by the law, they're not allowed to do them because of the consequences within their community. You see this in Europe with like these Muslim enclaves that have Sharia law. Technically, they have the right to do whatever, but they don't do it. They follow Sharia law within those communities because that's the law of the land in those communities, even if it's not technically the law of the land. So my solution is simply more honest. I want to repeal the laws at the foundational level for all citizens, whereas religious conservatives might just want to have religious communities police themselves and ignore the law. At the end of the day, it's the same goddamn thing. Women will have fewer rights, and men will be in charge, whether it's done at the state level or whether it's done at the religious community level. My solution simply doesn't depend on the existence of God, because that's a completely different argument. Because to have a religious community, you have to have religion. But to simply take away women's rights, which is what religious communities do, You don't need an imaginary friend in the sky that grants you wishes when you give him 10% of your money. Now, for those of you who might accuse me of being too focused on women's rights as the problem as opposed to other things like Captain Crunch, I'll point you to a 2015 study from the Iranian Journal of Nursing and Midwifery Research called Relationship Between Gender Role Attitude and Fertility Rate in Women Referring to Health Centers and Mashhad in 2013. In the results and conclusion sections it reads, quote, "Initial analysis of the data indicated there was a significant relationship between acceptance of gender stereotypes and gender egalitarianism and fertility. There was also a direct association between acceptance of gender stereotypes and the fertility rate 0.13, and an indirect association between egalitarianism and fertility rate, negative 0.15. Now, to explain that, if you scroll down to the results section towards the bottom, it reads, quote, "The calculated correlation coefficient for gender stereotypes with positive 0.13, which means that more gender stereotypes of the woman leads to having more numbers of children, whereas the calculated correlation coefficient for gender egalitarianism was negative 0.15, which represents an inverse relationship between gender egalitarianism and the number of children in the studied women." So basically what that means is when you had couples that weren't egalitarian, they had more children when they believed in traditional gender roles. When they were egalitarian, they had fewer children. What's also interesting is they have this table which talks about education and profession. Women who held a traditional or stereotypical gender role had an education score of 4.89, whereas egalitarian women had an education score of 12.154. However, in their profession, stereotypical or traditional gender-rolled women had a score of 4.63, and egalitarian women had a score of 4.71. So despite an educational score 3 times higher than those who held traditional or stereotypical views on gender, there really was no significant difference between those who held traditional gender roles and those who were egalitarian. And the reasons are clear to see. How many women go to college, get useless degrees, and end up becoming stay-at-home moms? Or get bullshit part-time jobs that they didn't require a degree to begin with? As I talked about in a previous video, if your career prospects are to become a wife and a mother, there is no reason for you to go to college. At all. Do not go to college. Just meet a guy and have a family. You don't need a college education to be a wife and a mother. And if you're going to college, at least major in something useful. Don't major in something like gender studies or English or medieval poetry. And if you're going to major in something useful, like maybe becoming a doctor, don't leave the profession in the first 5 years to become a wife and a mother, like you see in these articles about these female doctors. Doctor shortages being caused by women, because in the name of diversity and equality, all these women are being pushed into medical school. They become doctors, and then they leave the profession to become mothers after like 5 years. And now there are doctor shortages because all these female doctors are leaving to become wife and mothers. What a waste. And this study confirms that. These egalitarian women who want to be just like men run into the brick wall that is their biology, and then they take part-time jobs where they're not even using their education in order to be with their kids, which is fine. But just think of all the money you wasted. But the important part of this study is that it confirms that traditional gender roles, or women who believe in traditional gender roles, have more kids than women who are egalitarian. Now, I don't think I've lost anyone there. I just took it to the absurd conclusion with my whole puppy mill solution. I don't think any of my traditionalist critics would disagree that a woman who believes in traditional gender roles will have more kids than a woman who's a feminist egalitarian. Their disagreement with me is simply that I took it too far, taking all women's rights away as opposed to select women's rights, such as birth control, abortion, stuff like that. They still want to take women's rights away, just not all of them. Now, if you do research on this subject, you will find studies which supposedly say the exact opposite of what I just told you. And I'm sure someone trying to debunk or respond to this video or this idea will bring up some of these studies. So simply to preempt that, I'm going to debunk one of these studies, which was published in the German Demographic Research Journal in 2011. And this paper is called Gender Equality and Fertility Intentions Revisited Evidence from Finland. Now, if you read it, it talks about how egalitarianism actually increases fertility intentions, particularly with men, which makes complete sense. When you have a society where gender roles are equalized, where men are expected to be more nurturing towards children, and where women are expected to work more, it makes sense that more men are going to desire families. as opposed to men in a traditional society where women are the nurturers and the men go out and earn all the money. So of course, fertility intentions in men are going to be higher in an egalitarian society. I'm not disputing that. Problem is fertility higher in an egalitarian society? And the answer is, no, it's not. Because while the men may be making up for the fertility intentions, it's still the woman who has to have the baby. And there's only two ways to accomplish that. Some countries go as far as to provide women with free daycare so they can have a kid and leave the kid in some state-sponsored daycare. And then they can go off and earn the money. And that may raise the fertility rate a bit, but just think of how expensive that is. I talked about this in my video about Japan. It's extremely expensive. It's much more cost efficient just to have a parent taking care of the kids. But having the dad take care of the kids doesn't really lead to good outcomes, mainly because of female hypergamy. Women don't want a stay-at-home beta bitch. They're not attracted to a guy who's good with kids, they're attracted to a guy who earns a lot of money. It's just human nature. So in your best case scenario, you've created this egalitarian utopia where the women work their asses off and the men stay home and take care of the kids. Oh, isn't that all wonderful? The problem is, you're in the exact same place as a traditional society, except you're far less efficient. Because now the women are out earning all the money, but they're still the ones having the kids, so they have to leave the workforce to have the kid, even if the father stays home and takes care of the kid. It's the woman that has to leave work to give birth, and then if she's nursing, she has to go to the nursing room and pump breast milk into tubes that she sends home to her husband. It's incredibly inefficient. How much more efficient would it be to have the man earn the money and the woman stay home with the kids? If you're going to have a system that's going to be one way or the other, one just clearly makes more sense. One is clearly more in harmony with our instincts and human nature than the other. They're not necessarily bad, it's just the way it is. Now, I'm not saying everybody has to live by that, but there's like a U-curve. Whereas if you don't have these systems in place which grant women the ability to have children and then dump them on someone else, the way a man would have a child and dump it on someone else so that they can go back to work, you're going to have lower fertility as a result. Having high fertility intentions in men doesn't mean anything because they can't have the babies. Women are restricted by their biology and so are men. It doesn't matter how much you wish you were a man or wish you were a woman. If you're an egalitarian woman and you want to have a family but you also want a career, you have a decision to make because you're the one with the uterus, you're the one who has to have the baby. Unfortunately, that's biological reality. There's nothing you can do about it. Even if you get a sex change, even if you get an addictomy, you're still not a man. You can't impregnate another woman. And even if you're a man and you want to be a woman and you get to take a dick off of me, you still can't get pregnant, you still can't have a baby. We are still restricted by our biology, regardless of how progressive and egalitarian our society becomes. Someone has to work, and someone has to take care of the kids. That's the reality. Now, in this study, it puts forth the idea that egalitarianism is actually beneficial to fertility, and it names several European countries. It lists Denmark, Sweden, Iceland, the Netherlands, Finland, Spain, Ireland, Slovenia, Great Britain, Belgium, Germany, Croatia, and France. Now, going to Statista.com, I looked at the fertility rate from 2005 to 2015. So we should be able to see if all this egalitarianism, all this female empowerment in education, all these laws which empower women to act like men, if they're increasing fertility or not. If you look at the fertility rate between 2005 and 2015, it's gone up in some countries, it's gone down in some countries. But in every case, it's below replacement levels. The only exception is France. And you might say that France proves that I'm wrong. That you can have an egalitarian feminist society with replacement rate fertility. And if you think that, it's only because you're very ignorant over what's going on in France right now. They have a huge influx of immigrants, mainly from Africa, mainly Muslim, and it is them that are having all the babies. And in fact, I'll link to an article from the Occidental Observer called The Africanization of France. Medical data suggests 1/3 French babies are non-white, 34.44%. And their fertility rate is 2. And 1/3 of the babies are not native French. They're mostly African Muslims. They're the ones having all the kids. And if you take those births away, if you just look at the native French population, their fertility rate is not at replacement levels either. Now, before I'm accused of focusing too much on one issue, let's look at different issues in isolation and try to find what actually increases fertility. So let's first look at gender equality. So I found this article, and I'll link to it in the description, called The 10 Worst Countries for Gender Equality Ranked by Perception. Now it says ranked by perception, so this may not be completely scientifically accurate, but here we go. Number 1, Saudi Arabia. Number 2, South Korea. Number 3, India. Number 4, Algeria. Number 5, Malaysia. Number 6, Iran. Number 7, Turkey. Number 8, Indonesia. Number 9, Egypt. And number 10, Jordan. And as you can see, for the most part, they have replacement levels of fertility, except for Malaysia and Iran. So now let's look at the top 5 countries for gender equality in the Middle East. This is a little bit of a misnomer because we are looking at the Middle East, but let's just go with this. Number 1, Israel. Number 2, United Arab Emirates. Number 3, Kuwait. Number 4, Bahrain. Number 5, Qatar. And as you can see, they all have replacement levels of fertility except for the United Arab Emirates. Israel actually has the highest level of fertility. And that got my wheels turning. Maybe it's the fact that Israel's always getting bombed. Maybe it's the terrorism. Maybe it's the constant war. Maybe it's the instability, which actually causes higher fertility. Women are fearing that their sons are going to get killed, so they have more sons. So I looked into that. The world's top 10 most unstable countries. Number 1, the Maldives. Number 2, Mauritania. I don't know if I'm saying that right, I don't care. Number 3, Algeria. Number 4, Ethiopia. Number 5, Nigeria. Number 6, Turkey. Number 7, Russia. Number 8, Saudi Arabia. Number 9, Jordan. And number 10, China. And as you can see, for the most part, they have replacement levels of fertility, except for Russia and China. And in fact, Nigeria has a fertility rate of 6, at least in 2012. But again, Russia and China are bucking the trend. So now let's look at education. The countries with the lowest literacy rate in the world. Number 1, South Sudan. Number 2, Afghanistan. Number 3, Burkina Faso. Number 4, Niger. Number 5, Mali. Number 6, Chad. Number 7, Somalia. Number 8, Ethiopia. Number 9, Guinea. And number 10, Benin. I don't know if I'm pronouncing those right, I don't care. And all of them have fertility rates well above replacement level. In fact, the lowest fertility rate is 4.45. And to confirm this, here's a study called The Impact of Women's Schooling on Fertility and Contraception Use, a study of 14 sub-Saharan African countries. In the study, it reads, quote, "Women's schooling is posited to result in lower fertility and by inference higher contraceptive use through 4 main channels. Wage effects. By raising the opportunity cost of women's time in rearing children, schooling raises the price of children who are time intensive, as well as the wage that women can earn in the workforce. The wage benefits of schooling may also induce women to get more schooling, thereby delaying the onset of childbearing. This is likely to result in lower fertility and higher rates of female participation in the labor force. Higher demand for child schooling. Women with more schooling may develop higher aspirations for their own children's schooling. These aspirations may lead them to have fewer children and to invest in more schooling per child. This is the quantity-quality trade-off observed in other parts of the world, but examined only recently in sub-Saharan Africa. There are many initiating factors for this trade-off, including the levels of wages and employment expected by graduates and the quality and price of schooling. Lower child mortality. Women with more schooling are more likely to be more effective in producing healthy children, which lowers child mortality. As the wedge between live births and surviving children is narrowed, couples find that they can have fewer children to reach a target number of surviving children. In a cross-national study, Schultz found that fully half of the effect of female schooling and lower fertility was operating through the effect of lowering child mortality. More effective use of contraception. Educated women can learn about and use contraception more effectively than uneducated women, reducing the number of unanticipated pregnancies. Under the section Results by Cohort, it reads, quote, "Regressions run by cohort ages 15 to 24, 25 to 34, and 35 to 49 reveal that the overall relation between women's schooling and cumulative fertility is negative in the youngest and middle-aged cohorts in all of the countries and in the oldest cohort in more than half of the countries. The negative relation between schooling and cumulative fertility is almost always larger in the middle cohort than in the youngest cohort. The results suggest that the effect by women's schooling on fertility increases with a woman's age, and middle-aged, educated women are not catching up with the fertility of others in their cohort to compensate for lower fertility while young. The association of partial or completed primary schooling with lower cumulative fertility is observed to be a greater extent among the youngest cohort. However, Botswana, Ghana, and Zambia, which have relatively high levels of schooling, showed no significant effect of primary schooling in any of these cohorts. The higher levels of schooling are associated with significantly lower fertility in all cohorts, even in countries with low levels of schooling in the older cohort. What that means is, Female education means lower fertility, always. And it makes perfect sense why. A woman's fertility window starts when she's a teenager and ends when she's about 35, 40. That's when she starts having retard babies. That is the age where women go to school, go to college, and start their career. By the time they're in their career and they're ready to have a baby, they're going to have retard babies. It's too late. The window's closing. If women want to have kids, they have to have kids young. But they have to go to college, they have to start their career. And that's where lower fertility comes from. And here's something interesting. The next section is called Women's Schooling Compared with Men's. It says, quote, an issue of policy interest is the relative impact of men's and women's schooling on cumulative fertility. Because childrearing is not generally intensive in the time of the father in these countries, we do not expect higher education and earning capacity of husbands to raise the price of children as does women's education. More often, husband's education is used as a proxy for household income, and it may be a better proxy for income than the ownership of durable goods, which are already controlled for. Inclusion of an income proxy may alter the size of the woman's schooling coefficients to the extent that they are correlated with incomes or husband's education. Basically, I'm sorry for that word salad. Basically what that means is, men can be as educated as they want. It does not raise the price of children. It does not lower fertility. When women get educated, that lowers fertility. That is the central thing. Women's empowerment lowers fertility. The 3 E's that kill fertility are education, empowerment, and egalitarianism. And it is very gender specific. It only affects women. It doesn't affect men because men aren't the ones having kids. But when women are empowered to go pursue their career, they have fewer kids. When they have more rights, they have fewer kids. The only solution is to abandon egalitarianism and to restrict women's rights. They should not be educated, not to the level of men anyway. I mean, how many years of education does it take to be a homemaker, to be a wife and a mother? Certainly not 16 plus years. Now you may think it's inhumane to restrict women in this way. You may think this is an unrealistic solution, but in fact this is the only solution. The only way a society is going to keep its fertility rates above 2 is if women have fewer opportunities. When they have to be homemakers, when they can't get educated and have their own careers and then miss out on their fertility window. It's just common sense. And whether you do it by actually changing the law, by actually taking women's rights away like I advocate, or whether you do it through the religious route, where you have a religious community which takes away women's rights by calling contraception and abortion and stuff like that a sin, and by positively reinforcing things like being a stay-at-home mom. Basically advocating for traditional gender roles. I mean, it's the same thing. You're taking away women's rights, you're just doing it through social shame as opposed to the force of government. But this is the only solution, gentlemen. The question is, do you have the balls to go through with it? If you will not take women's rights away, if you will not restrict their opportunities, if you will not disempower women, then your society is going to die. You're not going to have enough kids to replace yourself. You're going to import people from patriarchal countries like the Middle East and Africa. And in a best case scenario, you'll simply be replaced. And in a worst case scenario, the men are going to be executed and the women are become war brides and rape slaves. Now I realize that living in an egalitarian society, being a blue pill man, being gynocentric, you don't want to do anything to harm or upset women. I get that. All I can tell you is if you don't do it, it's going to happen anyway. You don't have to get your hands dirty though, because you'll just be killed. And the people who replace you will take away your women's rights. So the good news is you don't have to do it yourself, but someone's going to do it. The system of female empowerment and egalitarianism is completely unsustainable because of basic biology. Now, as I said at the beginning, I want transhumanism. I want us to be free of our biology. But we're not going to get there by regressing into a dark age. I would love to see the West pull its head out of its ass and save itself so at the very least we can develop the technologies to transcend our biology. But until we get there, we need to use common sense. And if you won't do it, then your replacements will do it for you. So think about that. This is Turd Flinging Monkey. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.